Okay, everybody, I think we will go ahead and get started. My name is Lee Marino. I am with ASU's Morrison Institute for Public Policy. We are an applied research institute that's part of the Watts College of Public Service and Community Solutions at ASU. We conduct objective research on a broad range of policy topics, and we run a program called the Arizona Governance and Policy Academy. And the Policy Academy aims to connect Arizona's elected officials and community leaders with cutting-edge research to help better inform your decision-making. We're funded by a generous grant from APS that helps us to conduct programming like this. Today, I'm excited to introduce 3 leaders in local government for a program that's slightly different than what we've done in the past. We are joined by Lucinda Andreani, Stacey Brechler-Knaggs, and Chanecka, who have all helped secure and manage substantial federal grants for their communities and are here to share some tips, best practices, and lessons they've learned along the way. We will have time for questions at the end, so please use the Q&A box to type in any questions you have throughout the program, and we'll go through those at the end. So we'll start with Stacey Brechler-Knaggs, who's the Director of Emergency Management Grants and Contracts for the City of Flagstaff. Stacey is an Arizona native and has worked for the City of Flagstaff for more than 40 years, with 32 years of grants and contracts management experience. She administers more than $75 million a year in federal, state, and local grants, and oversees hundreds of citywide agreements. Stacey also oversees the Emergency Management Program, which is a core public safety function that works to prepare the community to mitigate against, prepare for, respond to, and recover from large incidents or disasters. In addition, she assists in development of emergency operation planning. Thanks, Stacey.
And hopefully you can all see my screen.
Yep, you're good.
Great. Welcome, everyone. Nice to be able to have this opportunity to share with you what the City of Flagstaff, one of our successful grants. We have many. We have a couple hundred active grants, and we have almost 20 million in budgeted grant revenue. So very successful grants here at the City of Flagstaff. So a little bit about our first project, or the project that I'm going to talk about today, and then some tips and tools for pre-award and post-award is our Downtown Mile Safety and Connectivity Improvement Project. This project was aimed at improving pedestrian safety, traffic flow, and rail operation on our downtown's busiest transportation corridor. The focus of the project was really to facilitate construction of several important Flagstaff multimodal and flood control projects under the rail corridor. We have a busy railroad here. We have almost 100 trains a day that go through. So this will really provide connectivity to underserved neighborhoods and access to the local transportation hub. It also will expand the national rail infrastructure and provide safety improvements for pedestrian crossings and industry and passenger rail operations. So if you've been to Flagstaff, our rail goes right downtown, right through the downtown. Trains go both directions. So it's a very busy corridor. So with that, we ended up getting in a grant award with the Department of Transportation, the 2022 Infra Multimodal Program Discretionary Grant. We received $32 million from the grant, with matching funds coming from the City of Flagstaff, 9.8. And then the railroad is pitching in $11 million to help offset this grant with the City of Flagstaff. We also have our local metro plan that is contributing $500,000. And then ADOT, Arizona Department of Transportation, is our state transportation. We received $3 million in a local smart matching grant. So we're really stacked grants. We really were able to get this. I think the total is about $56 million for this project. And we were able to stack it with multiple partners. And so I think this really shows the level of effort to get these large grants and to get them successful, that we really need to work with our project partners and really figure out how to get multiple agencies involved to help us with our funding and the matches out there. I know it's difficult for communities to meet the matches sometime. And so this was a good way for us to have partnership in this grant. And then the website's there if you want to look at the project website. Next is really the scope of the project. That's 7 projects within this one grant. So we have been in design and environmental right now for this project for almost a year. And I think we're at about 60% design right now, but and the environmental work that is going down in this corridor has been extensive. So really, that's kind of where we're at now before we can start the construction. But you'll see there's the 7 scope of work: the BNSF rail alignment, the Florence to Walden underpass, which is in this corridor, the Milton roadway improvements, which is right in the downtown, bridge reconstruction, and a Flagstaff urban trail system underpass, and the Rio de Flag drainage crossing, and then the Amtrak. We have Amtrak that goes through Flagstaff, is also one of our railroads that go or trains that go through here. And so we're going to do some improvements to that platform. So that's a little bit about the project. I didn't want to spend too much time on the actual specifics of the project, but talk a little bit about pre-award grant tips and ways that the city of Flagstaff has been successful. If you aren't already doing it, get on grants.gov and get that daily email. I signed up for every federal agency, even though we don't get a lot of science grants or National Science Foundation grants or research grants as the city, but I do sign up for every agency and get a daily email, and that will help you kind of see those grants that are out there. And then agency specific, if you for your state, ADOT, Arizona Department of Transportation, Department of Justice, all these agencies actually have a newsletter that you can get, and you can get an email from them about upcoming grant opportunities. So go into the specific agencies that you work with, whether it's Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Justice, or whoever agencies that you work the most with, and get on their email list, and they'll send you information and start helping you find those and seek for those grants. And then we kind of spread a wide net here at the city. All our staff are looking for grants. They will find something, and then they will go ahead and let us know that they found an opportunity, and are we interested in looking for that grant or applying for it. Register in SAM.gov. If you aren't in SAM.gov, you should be in there right now, getting in there, getting registered, because that is your system of award management. That is where you have to be registered in SAM.gov to apply. The other thing that we've done is hired experienced grant writers. I'm more of a grant manager and do the post award, heavy in the post award, but we're hiring consulting firms to help us with this grant. We actually hired a consulting firm to help write the Downtown Mile grant. They are transportation experts. They knew the Flagstaff, and they knew what the transportation needs were here. And so that really helped us be successful in our grant. So hiring those experienced grant writers and people that are subject matter experts, whether it be in environmental protection or in transportation grants, to hire them. And then make sure that you pass the agency risk review. The 2 CFR now, federal regulations requires that you pass an agency risk review, that you have strong performance, financial, all sorts of things in that that you need to be able to pass. If you can't pass that agency risk review, you're kicked out automatically. You will not even go to that next level. So make sure that you can pass that agency risk review, and know that that's your first step into the gate. And like I said, if you don't pass the agency risk review, they won't even look at your application. And then match the funding agency mission goals and priorities. I think it's important for you to get on the website of whatever agency that you're looking at and see what their mission and vision is and their goals, and try to align with that. Often they'll say what their mission is in the NOFO and the notice of funding opportunity, but beyond that, even their goals as their agency and what the type of projects that they like to fund. And that's critical. You want to align with that agency to get the funding from the agency's priorities. And then make sure your narrative aligns with the notice of funding opportunity. Collaborate with your external partners. If you do that while your proposal development, be doing that now, and looking at those partners and talking with them. You can talk to your funding agency prior to the deadline of the the notice of funding before your application is due. Talk to them and make sure that you're having conversations with those funding agencies. And then third-party external application review. Once we have a pretty good 80 to 90% draft, we'll have our application reviewed by people within the organization, outside of the organization, to help us get that layman's view to make sure that they understand what we're trying to apply for and what our need is and our scope. And so the many eyes on your application are, I think, very beneficial. They help, kind of see those things that they said, I don't understand this, that doesn't make sense. So make sure that you're getting your applications reviewed. Next, if you haven't already attended webinars for your applications, make sure you're attending all those webinars. Make sure you're getting your stakeholder and financial letters of support. You're clearly describing the community benefit. I think nowadays they really want to know what the benefit is to your community. Why do you want this money? Why are you asking for it? What is the need? And where are you located? Where is your project map, location maps, your photos? Let them know who you are and what the type of community that you are. That, as I mentioned earlier, that, we have 80 to 100 trains going through a day. We're in a busy corridor. We have tourists. It's right on the gateway to the Grand Canyon. And so why this is critical need for your community. And I think that helps paint the picture and the story. And then answer questions, their criteria questions clearly and concisely. Be very factual, be very clear. Try not to muddy the application with too much of why maybe in the need. Just answer the questions, answer that criteria questions very, very succinct, and to make it easy for the evaluator to review and understand your answer to that criteria question. And then build a strong team. When we're writing our grant applications, we have a team of members. If we're writing for this downtown corridor, we'll have our consultant, we'll have our grants management team, we'll maybe have somebody from legal and procurement, a capital engineer. So we'll build a team to work together on the proposal and the application that have a variety of expertise. We'll have an accountant that's looking at that budget and that's reviewing it. So we'll make sure that we have a well-rounded review team working on the grant application. And then you really want to, nowadays, you want to get to that highly recommended, highly rated. If you get into that highly recommended, highly rated, you may not receive the grant award. You may be at that cut line, but you really want to get to highly recommended. That's where you want to get to. And make sure that if you get to that highly recommended and you don't make the cut because of the competition, but you're there, and then when you have your agency debrief, which if you're unsuccessful, make sure that you're having that, and they can get you, if they say you were medium in this area but you were highly recommended everywhere else, you can work on that criteria and what you need to do to get to that highly recommended, and that's where you're going to receive that award. And then I'll go through real quick, and hopefully this is helping you all, and you're picking up a few tricks and tips. On the post-award grant side, make sure that you're ready. Make sure that you're ready to receive that award. Just assume that you submitted that grant, you're going to get highly recommended, and you're going to get the award, and you're ready to go and do your project. So make sure that you're ready for the post-award side, that you can comply with the Federal 2 CFR Part 200 and all the state and local regulations, that you can comply with the grant agreement. A lot of times, even at the application phase, if you get on their website, they'll have sample templates. So you can already be looking at a template grant agreement and knowing what those criteria is going to be and what those regulations are going to be. And so you're ready to go once that grant agreement shows up. And then we have, after we get the grant award, we'll have a post-award meeting, and we'll bring in all our players, our project representatives that are going to implement this. If it's a capital project, such as this one, we'll bring in procurement, accounting, our grants and contracts team will bring in a variety of members that are going to be a part of this project, legal, and have a post-award meeting so that everybody's on the same page and they know what their roles and responsibilities are going to be. And then if your grant always gives you a period of performance and when you can expend those funds. And I think that those dates are critical, that you make sure that you're, expending those funds within the effective date, and that you're always monitoring that expiration date, so that 6 months out, if you're not going to hit that performance deadline, that you're working with your funder to get a time extension or whatever it might be, and that you're also looking at your budget. You're consistently monitoring an overview and oversight of your scope of work. If your scope of work is going to change, that's okay. Your funder needs to know that, and they will work with you to amend your scope. So don't ever be afraid to be working with your funder to discuss the budget, discuss the scope of work, and make sure that you're aligning with that scope. And if something changes, good or bad, talk with your funder, communicate with them, let them know where your project's at. They like to hear your success, and they like to hear if you're struggling and your challenges, and so that they could be your partner and help you through those. So I'm constantly talking with our funders on our grants. Stay organized. I know that seems like a silly pointer, but being highly organized in the grant world is important. Attend any trainings, webinars, and funders meetings. And then lastly, remedies for non-compliance. If you are in a compliance situation where you're not complying with the grant, make sure you're talking with your funder, get yourself back in compliance. They want to help you. They want to see you be successful. They want you to finish that project on time and on budget and with success. And then work with them on that closeout process. Make sure that you're closing out and you have all the deliverables. You have everything that you need to be able to close out that project. Make sure you get your final check for reimbursement, and kind of have a checklist that you can go through to make sure that you have your closeout. And then celebrate your project success. Make sure that you have your ribbon cuttings and your award ceremonies to celebrate, and invite your funder, invite your governor from your state or whatever it might be to celebrate your project. They love to be there to celebrate and receive the win along with you and see the project firsthand. So with that, I'll go ahead and that's it for me, and turn it over to the next speaker. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Stacey. Next, we'll hear from Chanecka, who is the Director of Housing and Community Development for the City of Tucson. She has over 20 years of experience in grant writing, planning, and community development. And as director, she oversees the public housing and housing choice voucher programs, homeless solutions, planning, and community development for the department. She oversaw the successful Housing and Urban Development $50 million Choice Neighborhood Implementation Grant Program. And Ann, you are not sharing your PowerPoint right now.
Interesting. Okay. It said I was. Good morning, all.
Multiple screen problem. It was showing your browser.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
All right. That should be better. Thank you, Lee, and thank you, Stacey. I really appreciated your presentation and share many of your sentiments in terms of grants. So, for my presentation, I'm focusing on a few tips and tricks that I've learned I've been applying for federal funding and other grants throughout my career, and this is why it's called Success and Not Stories. I do feel like a lot of what I've learned has been the hard way. And so if I can prevent some of you from applying for grants that aren't good fits, etc., that's my goal here. So I mentioned I've been applying for grants for over 20 years. So one of my very first professional jobs in my career, so I graduated from undergraduate, and then I went into the Peace Corps, and then my very first job when I got back to the United States and was receiving sort of a salaried paycheck was working for a nonprofit And that nonprofit was called Gaining Early Awareness and Readiness for Undergraduate Programs. It was a nonprofit organization that was 100% funded via a federal grant. And so I, in retrospect, really appreciated that that was my first perspective in terms of grants, because I learned firsthand how challenging it can be to not know if the funding you have will continue into the future. So I worked for that nonprofit organization for 3 years. And in the final year of the grant was the year I decided to go back to school. But I think that learning just how challenging from a staff perspective it can be to rely on the grant funding for your job, I think has been something that I've carried with me. And so my first lesson, tip, trick in terms of federal funding is really think through sustainability from the beginning. If you're going to apply for a new activity or a program that relies on federal funding, really trying to think through what that could look like into the future. And I will say, full disclosure here, I have broken this lesson many times, and that sometimes you see an opportunity and you know there's a need, and it's especially lately with the pandemic and sources that were available, I did decide to start programs and bring on staff without a sustainable funding solution, but have tried to be very communicative and bringing that up from the beginning. So my second kind of tips and tricks, and I will share some additional examples when I'm done with some of these lessons, is really making sure you're going after the right grants. So really appreciate Stacey talking about grants.gov and sort of seeing what's out there. And I often find that it can be a little overwhelming to narrow down what are the best options for funding that you really could be competitive. And so a few of the things that I have learned there is really doing your homework on the grant source, really trying to understand who was funded in the past, what are the areas that they're likely looking for, and as Stacey had mentioned, does that really align with what you're doing? I really encourage folks not to try to twist your work and your activities to meet the funding, but really to focus on the work that's most important for your community and then go after grants that align with that. So to me, looking at opportunities, I always go through a process of assessing our capacity both to write the grant. Sometimes federal funding grants are exhausting and take a lot of resources. And so what is our capacity not only to write the grant, but then to deliver on the grant, and really making sure that that aligns with the mission. And so the third bullet here is to try to me, the biggest area that I have found in terms of funders wanting to fund grants is balancing and kind of threading the needle between showing you have the need for this funding and also you have the capacity to deliver this funding. And so that sometimes that's really tricky. And so to me, when you're really trying to strike that balance in the narrative. And so I had to dig out this photo today. So I started out with education grants, and then I spent a decade of my career working on transportation. And this is a grant that I helped Tohono O'odham secure. And my comment when we were trying to put together the grant, you could include photos. So I asked staff, they wanted to have a bridge over a wash that was adjacent to a road because they kept having older adults getting stuck in the wash. And so I had asked them to share pictures that help highlight what the need is. And so they really accepted the assignment and excelled. So they did end up getting that. But that's an example of sometimes if pictures are allowed, pictures speak more volumes than words. And then my last comment here is if you feel like all of those things you can share that your organization is a good fit for the funding, sometimes it takes a couple times to get some of the larger federal grants. And so if you do feel like you have the capacity, you have the need, you can do this, it really aligns with what you're trying to do. I do subscribe to the try again theory. And then there's a lot of federal grants, and yet there's a lot of competition out there for any dollars I find in any of the areas I work in. So I really am subscribed to collaboration over competition and really trying to communicate with folks. And, I obviously work for the local government, but we know that there's a lot of nonprofits that also try to apply for these grants. And so rather than having multiple grants coming in from the same area, how do you try to wrap people into a grant that can be really competitive, and also making sure that there's the budget is mindful of multiple agencies and what that looks like. So really always do try to collaborate rather than compete. And in some cases, that means foregoing grants. So even though the work that we do here, I'll give an example. We all know how important housing is and how challenging housing can be these days. We noticed there was federal funding available to provide more rental assistance and eviction prevention. And so, well, that is something that aligns very closely with the work that we do, and we have several programs around that. I had a conversation with the county, who really excels in that space. They are the leader in this region when it comes to emergency eviction prevention. And so working with them, we agreed it made more sense for them to apply for that grant. We wrote a letter of support, trying to figure out how do we strengthen their application rather than compete and make it difficult. And then my last sort of tip and trick is really trying to build relationships with the grant management staff for whatever agency you're applying for. I know that historically that is always I was sort of advised against that early in my career, that you should have all the answers and not really view the grant management staff as collaborative partners. And I have found that it's really helpful to try to build those relationships, be honest with them, talk about areas you're struggling. They want you to succeed too. They want you to spend the funding. They want to make sure you're in compliance with their requirements. So they have a vested interest in helping you. And so for a grant that I'm going to talk about in a moment, we have been working with the same staff for over 6 years now, and really have built a positive relationship, which has resulted in, this is a picture of the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. So essentially, the Undersecretary of HUD has now come to Tucson 3 times in the last couple of years, in part because of the grant management staff communicating with him, hey, think you're really going to like what's happening down there in Tucson, and think that it's a really good example for a lot of the work you're trying to do. And so based on building that relationship, have been able to really highlight the work we're doing and hopefully secure additional funding as well. So those are sort of 4 lessons that I have learned, in some cases the hard way. And so I'm going to share a couple of grants that we are working on and or chose to pass on, and sort of how these lessons have played out here. So the largest grant I've ever helped secure and I'm working on is a Choice Neighborhoods grant. And there's sort of several pieces to this and several lessons learned. So Choice Neighborhoods is a program of housing and urban development. And if anyone's familiar with what used to be the Hope 6 program, where it helped rehabilitate public housing, this is sort of the next iteration of that. And Choice Neighborhoods provides different types of grants. So there is a planning grant, which the City of Tucson applied for and received in 2018. And the planning grant helps you do community engagement, resident engagement, and then create a transformation plan. And then the other grant that the federal, that HUD gives under Choice Neighborhoods is an implementation grant. And so the implementation grant is really to try to implement that transformation plan that you've already created. And so that grant is a $50 million grant that we secured the summer of 2023. And so a couple lessons learned here. For the planning grant, I mentioned we received it in 2018. What you don't often hear about is that the City of Tucson applied in 2016 and didn't get it, applied in 2017, didn't get it, and then finally received the grant in 2018. And so the staff were working on the grant and really sort of meeting the deliverables on the timelines that you're supposed to when 2020 hit, and really ended up making it really challenging to meet timelines. And a lot about the grant was resident engagement. And clearly for quite a while, we couldn't do resident engagement. And so during that time, there was a shift in terms of the program requirements. And so even though we had a planning grant, based on the changes that HUD made, we were then not eligible to apply for an implementation grant. And I bring that up because we had to make a decision as an organization. Do we try to change what we're doing to fit the new requirements? Or do we stay true to what we're hearing and what we think is best for our community, and either forego the potential of the next phase of the grant? Or do we try to work with our federal partners and see about changing the requirements? And so what we chose to do, we knew that what was best for our community isn't what they had changed the program to be. So we did lobby and advocate that they really consider how the changes impacted our ability to deliver on the grants that they had already given us. And so it took years. This is not an easy process, but eventually they did make exceptions to the requirements they made for existing grantees, and we were able to apply for the grant in 2023, and we were awarded it in the summer of 23. I mentioned that's a $50 million grant, and part of our decision to apply, we knew capacity would be a challenge, and I'll say that it was really hard to meet the deadline, and it was a really taxing grant for our staff. And part of why we decided to apply when we applied is because we were eligible. We met the criteria. We didn't know if that would continue into the future. We also knew that at that time, the federal government was really funding the program. And so trying to create those trade-offs, do we wait another year and then potentially not be eligible? And so we just went through that again we applied for a planning grant for a new area. We felt like we didn't quite have all our ducks in a row quite yet to get the planning grant, but we knew that the HUD had the funding now. We didn't know if they would have it into the future. So we decided to apply, and we were awarded a planning grant again for another area. So here's a second grant that we recently submitted that we are waiting to hear on, and thought I would just sort of walk through what was our thought process on applying or not applying. So the PRICE grant is another housing and urban development grant, and it's really to support housing stability, climate resiliency, and self-governance all around manufactured and mobile housing. And so this is a grant that It's the very first year that HUD has ever put out funding for manufactured housing. We have no idea what HUD will think is competitive. I mean, other than the NOFO, which we always follow to a T. But given there's not history there to see what they funded in the past, we really went back and forth on, do we take the time and energy to apply for this? And really what we ended up coming around to is we've done so much work around housing stability. Our city created a climate action plan recently. We know the number of mobile and manufactured housing in our community is much higher than the national average. And we also know with extreme heat, we have a real safety issue. So looking at it and trying to decide cost benefit, we felt like the time and resources to submit for this grant would be worth it in the end because it aligned with so much of what we're trying to do. And so as we looked to create a new program and really consider what might be competitive, we really tried to figure out how do we work with all of the folks that are doing work in this space in the community and put together a competitive application. So examples of what we did over a couple month period, still waiting to hear. We should be hearing in the next even few weeks whether or not we were successful on that grant. And then last, this is a grant that we decided not to apply for. So HUD recently released funding, new funding for permanent supportive housing, which is really housing to long-term support persons experiencing homelessness. And this was an example of a grant that, looking at the capacity, and well, we do have projects that would fit and could really use the funding. I made the decision that the people around me had been applying and working on all of these new programs and new funding sources, that this just felt like one too many things to try to do at once. And so really trying to think about capacity to write grants versus capacity to deliver grants in need. Sometimes it's important to make the decision that's like, I can't add one more thing. So that was an example of a grant that we're not applying for. And so that's all for me. And I think at the end, we'll have time for questions.
So thank you so much, Anne. Lastly, we are joined by Lucinda Andreani, who joined Coconino County in 2005. She leads teams through various project roles and emergencies and is now a member of the county's executive team as a deputy county manager for Coconino County and serves as the Coconino County Flood Control District Administrator. She's currently leading a team that's addressing the pipeline fire post-wildfire flooding impacts after securing about $100 million in federal funding. The team has completed $44 million in major watershed restoration and flood mitigation projects in less than a year from receiving the funding, and she'll tell us more about that.
All right, good morning, everyone. And certainly there's going to be some reiteration of the key messages and lessons learned that you heard from Stacey and and I think, and there'll be some new messages here. Go ahead, Sean. We're going to walk through a few slides here. And, you know, I think you heard some of these things. I think part of what is really important is to be thinking strategically about your book of business. And, you know, as Anne particularly mentioned, you know, what are your threats and what are your top priorities, and really identifying those grants and then really putting the time and effort into those and really developing, you know, what I call the value proposition. I mean, how what you're going to spend this money on is going to make a difference in your community. And what does it mean? Well, how is it going to be a game changer? And really working on how do you articulate that in a very clear and commanding way. Language in these is very important. And of course, along with that, you got to collect the facts and data to support that. So it isn't just all a soft statement, but that you've actually got the facts to make it a very competitive grant proposal. And, you know, I think one of the things that we've done really well over the years throughout the county, not just in relationship to emergencies, but cultivating the agency relationships. And Ann spoke to having the undersecretary come out over the last couple of years. And we just had a visit. We invited the chief of the Natural Resources Conservation Service, USDA, as well as Undersecretary Homer Wilkes from USDA out and had those visits. And it is very important. And I would say key to a lot of that too is getting the media coverage so that you can educate the public about what you're doing and have a third party articulate, your grantor articulate your success. And you're not just the only one articulating that success. So cultivating those relationships, particularly with your congressional representatives, you know, key leadership in the agencies, and helping them really understand where are you going and where are you going to need their support to achieve, you know, your goals. And we've been very successful with that. And that continuous, you know, for other grants that you may not be just disaster or emergency related. And then cultivating the right partners and consultants. And I think that was mentioned as well. And we'll highlight one of our partners, which is that we've utilized on one of these grants. Actually on a couple of both grants that I'm going to highlight, which is MetroPlan, which is our transportation planning organization here in Northern Arizona and Flagstaff area. And they've been very helpful, particularly in that arena. So on to the next slide there, Sean. You know, you can see, I want to kind of touch on two quick case studies. One is, as Lee mentioned, the recent pipeline fire, post-wildfire flood disaster that we're addressing. And now, updating the figures that Lee shared, we've now secured over 120 million in funding and grant funding. And then the second quick case study is a drainage master plan for the town of Tucson, which is the gateway to the Grand Canyon. Sean, go to the next slide here. This is just some reflections on, you know, what can occur and what does occur, how devastating this post-wildfire flooding is to our communities. We've now experienced 3 wildfires, frankly, relatively small in the scope of mega fires these days, but have had tremendous, severe, and repetitive post-wildfire flooding that have affected both county areas and the city of Flagstaff. Next slide, please. This is a total of the grant awards that we've secured to date for the pipeline flood mitigation. Pipeline fire occurred in June of 2022. We then had 45 major flood events that summer, and we secured the funding in one big bucket, this U.S. Forest Service Good Neighbor Authority, the 42 million. In March, late March of 2022, and then the 2 NRCS awards totaling about 60 million in April of 2022. We've now expended, updated figure here, over 70 million of those awards. We also recently received a Protect grant through Department of Transportation, Federal Department of Transportation, with a grant match from AZ Smart grant through the State Transportation Board to match that grant. We also secured through the Department of Forestry and Fire Management a grant match for those NRCS grant awards. And then another area that everyone should be looking at, working with their congressional representatives, is congressionally directed spending award. And we just received an award for about 1.2 million toward flood related, and then roughly 800,000 directed toward a forest restoration project here in the community. So next slide. Why the success? Key to this is those long-term partnerships with the agency and congressional representatives. And that combined with, we have a very powerful team here. We've developed, when we had the fire, we simultaneously developed a short-term flood mitigation response and executed a short-term plan to get out sandbags, barriers to mitigate impacts to homes. Simultaneously, we were developing the long-term flood mitigation plan. Frankly, we'd had the benefit of having 2 prior fires, so we knew what we needed to do. And I knew that we had a very narrow window of securing funding, given what was going on politically in 2022. And I reached out to our then Congressman Tom O'Halloran, asked him to co-host a meeting in August of 2022. We co-host a meeting with federal agencies. He was part of inviting those agencies, and we sat down with them and went through the entire plan, did a tour of the flood area, which in fact it flooded that day, which put a lot of emphasis on the reality. Most of those people had not seen the actual flooding. Actually, the congressman he'd been out there prior, but and that was key to securing not only congressional support, but the agency support for that funding. And again, leveraging the media coverage and communications. We had also had a great track record. We had performed really well on prior projects in the post 2 prior fires. And so we went into it with a lot of strength and ability to have people understand that the plan that we put together, we could execute and execute quickly. Next slide, please. And this is just some examples. We've had tremendous support from Senator Kelly, Senator Sinema, and they, along with Tom O'Halloran, put the disaster funding and NRCS funding into the omnibus bill that was passed like 3 days before Christmas in 2022. So having those relationships and having them, work to get that funding into legislation is was key to all of this, or the vast majority of this. Next slide, please. And then this is a photograph from the gentleman on the far left there, Dr. Homer Wilkes, Undersecretary of USDA, as I mentioned, was recently visited us. And this is kind of a set of our partners and folks that have been involved not only in flood mitigation, but our forest restoration initiative as well. Next slide, please. Another grant that we secured, as you noted on that listing, was a Protect grant, which is a new grant coming through Department of Transportation that's really focused on resiliency. And certainly what we're doing out in the flood area is the whole focus is building resiliency between watershed restoration on forest and flood mitigation in the neighborhoods, and then detention facilities and so forth. So we worked with MetroPlan, again, our local transportation planning organization, and they worked with us, develop a very strong application. We're the only grant that was issued in the state of Arizona, one of very few across the country. And in fact, Secretary Buttigieg called our then chair of the board and complimented him on our application and said that this was the strongest grant application that they had received. And so using that expertise and using, assets that you have in your community that can support your applications. We were also very successful at generating support from our tribes in our area who are much impacted by these projects, positively by the projects, and impacted very negatively by the flooding that affects Highway 89. We had a wide variety of support letters and support from those entities, both within the agency and through the letters. Next slide, please. This is just some of the lessons learned coming out of the Protect grant. I think you can read this, but a lot of it, really defining the roles and a key piece was that Metro Plan worked with NAU to develop the benefit cost analysis, and they did a phenomenal job with that. And so we had a very strong case to make financially. Next slide, please. And the other, I'll just touch on this, the other grant that we recently secured, working in partnership with the town of Tucson, and ADOT, and again, significant contribution from Metro Plan. We secured a grant to conduct a drainage master plan for this area. It had been impacted by an event in August 2023, but we had known for many years that Tucson is subject to very, very severe flooding from monsoon events. And we secured a grant through State Transportation Board for $2.4 million. And again, that was a great partnership grant, working hand in hand, and the district will be both project managing that grant and conducting the grant administration in partnership with the town. Next slide, please. So overall lessons learned, I think you've heard this, I think consistently from all three presenters. And you certainly, you'll learn a tremendous amount as you go along. And, but important again, this strategic planning, set your goals and take action, move things forward. And yes, there are grants you'll have to compete on maybe multiple years before you're awarded, but refining those and staying with that, if that is a real opportunity for you, is important. And deciding, as Ann pointed out, when do you not apply? You don't go down a path, and or support others to apply. So thank you very much, Lee. Appreciate the opportunity, and I assume you'll share our contact information with folks if people have any follow-up questions. For all of us now or at any other time, please feel free to reach out.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Lucinda. We have a few more minutes. I haven't seen any questions come through, but feel free to type them now, and I will start asking Ann a quick question. During our prep call, you talked a little bit about for Thrive in 05, you kind of had one plan, and then based on resident feedback, that isn't actually what they thought was going to be the best for the community. So you kind of had to pitch and lobby to change the scope, and I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we were aligned, from the engagement piece, we wanted to hear from residents from the beginning and what we heard from residents. So for long story short, you focus on a particular housing site. The housing site we focused on, which we received the planning grant for, is an older adult community. And it is a 1963 tower in Tucson that's pretty beloved. And traditionally speaking, the grant, it really is geared towards families and geared towards new construction. So doing resident engagement, what we heard loud and clear is that the residents really wanted to stay in the location they were in and have it be renovated. So that was sort of unique number one, that's sort of in conflict with the grant program. And then the second conflict, it really is a community for older adults, seniors ages 55 and older. And it was very clear from the grant folks that they were moving away from that type of project and they were only going to fund families. And so we had to figure out, do we morph what our plans are, listening to residents, and try to figure out building a new housing complex somewhere within the Thrive in the O5 area that's family oriented, or do we stick with what we had been hearing from the community? And we really heard this desire to preserve this historic resource in our community and really support older adults. And so we challenged HUD and really just said we feel like it's disingenuous to provide funding, to listen to resident and feedback, and then not be able to put that into action. And eventually they really did make an exception. And so the year we applied, we joked about the Tucson clause. We know there was at least one other community in the country that had a similar situation, so it wasn't just Tucson. But I think that they wanted to give us a shot. And so that was why, even though it was hard to put together the match, which we haven't touched on, I think match can be a real challenge for some of these grants. We went for it.
Awesome. Thank you, Ann. And sorry, the Q&A was disabled, I just noticed, but it's open now. We have 5 more minutes if anyone wants to pop in any burning questions. Otherwise, as Lucinda says, after this, I will send out an email to everybody with people's contact info and the presentations, if you would like to contact them personally. Okay. Can you speak to the risk item that the first presenter highlighted, Stacey?
To the risk, meaning our internal controls and risk of, the risk review. So under 2 CFR, there is a whole section that has it's in the pre-section and the pre-award section. And it has a number of items that you have to hit. It has history of performance, your financial system, talks about past performance on grants. I know Lucinda talked a little bit about that, having prior performance. And so take a look at that. And that is, that's where it's at. And they're saying that if you can't answer these questions and you have not succeeded in doing well on prior grants or any of your past history, you have any audit issues, they automatically are pushing those applications off to the side, and they are not even getting them to the review panel. So that is new in the 2 CFR. And if you're not familiar with 2 CFR, you can type that in and get on that link, because 2 CFR has also changed as of October 1. They have some new requirements. And so that is, if you're going to get a federal grant, that should be your guiding document. So make sure that you're taking a look at that, and hopefully that answered your question.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. I don't see anything else coming in. Like I said, I will send out everyone's contact info, and we will put this recording up on the Morrison Institute YouTube page if anyone wants to revisit it, because I know there was a lot of really good points made. So thank you so much, all 3 of you, for joining us. It was good to have Northern and Southern Arizona represented, and you guys had really, really good tips. So thank you very much.
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.